I always thought my wife was the most honest person I had ever known. For 16 years, I trusted her with everything. My heart, my home, my children, my future. I never checked her phone. Never questioned her late meetings. Never doubted her stories. Because why would I? She was my wife. The mother of my children. The woman I believed would stand beside me until the day I died. But one rainy Thursday afternoon, I followed her car for the first time in my life. And what I discovered destroyed everything I thought I knew. Because my wife wasn't going to work. She wasn't visiting her sick aunt. And she wasn't meeting friends. She was driving to another city, to another house, to another family. And when I knocked on that front door, a man answered. A man who looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. Then he said 7 words I'll never forget. Can I help you? My wife isn't home. My wife. He called her his wife. And that's when my entire world collapsed. But the truth was even worse than that. Because neither of us knew what was really happening. And when we finally uncovered her secret, we wished we never had. My name is Daniel. I'm 43 years old now. And before all this happened, I would have described my life as ordinary. Not perfect. Just happy. The kind of life millions of people dream about. I worked as an insurance adjuster. Nothing glamorous. Nothing exciting. Just enough to provide for my family. My wife, Rebecca, worked as a regional sales consultant for a medical supply company. At least that's what she told me. The job required travel. Not constant travel. Just enough to explain why she'd occasionally disappear for a few days every month. Over the years, it became normal. Conference in Cedar Falls. Client meeting in Greenville. Training seminar downtown. There was always a reason. And I believed every single one. We had 2 children together. Emily was 14. Jacob was 11. They adored their mother. Honestly, everyone did. Rebecca had this way of making people feel important. When she talked to you, it felt like you were the only person in the room. She remembered birthdays. Sent thoughtful texts. Bought unexpected gifts. She seemed incapable of selfishness. Which is why the truth felt impossible when I first started noticing the cracks. Because the cracks didn't begin with some dramatic discovery. They started with tiny things. Little inconsistencies. Moments that didn't make sense. The kind of details most people ignore. I almost ignored them too. But once I noticed the first one, I couldn't stop seeing the others. And looking back now, I realized the signs had been there for years. I just never wanted to see them. The first clue appeared on a Tuesday morning. A completely ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day you forget 5 minutes after it ends. Rebecca was supposedly attending a sales conference 2 hours away. She left before sunrise. Kissed me goodbye. Promised she'd be home Friday. Everything seemed normal. Until that afternoon. I received a call from our bank. Not unusual. We'd recently refinanced our mortgage. The representative simply needed clarification about a transaction. While discussing the account, she casually mentioned something strange. A recurring utility payment. For an address I didn't recognize. At first I assumed it was an error. Maybe an old account. Maybe a mistake. But when I asked Rebecca about it later that week, something happened. Something so small I almost missed it. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she laughed. Oh, that's probably Mom's place. Remember? I helped her set up automatic payments years ago. It sounded reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. Except her mother had passed away 3 years earlier. And when I reminded her, Rebecca froze. Just for an instant. Then she quickly corrected herself. No, sorry. I'm at my cousin's house. And somehow, that explanation felt wrong. I couldn't explain why. But for the first time in 16 years, I felt suspicion. A feeling that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Because once suspicion enters a marriage, it changes everything. And I had no idea that tiny conversation was about to lead me into a nightmare neither of us could escape. For the next few weeks, I tried convincing myself I was being paranoid. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone forgets things. One awkward answer doesn't mean anything. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But then another strange thing happened. And another. And another. One evening Rebecca left her phone on the kitchen counter while taking a shower. Normally I would have ignored it. I respected her privacy. But that nagging feeling wouldn't disappear. The screen lit up. A message notification appeared. Just one sentence. We miss you already. No name. No photo. Just the words. We miss you already. My stomach tightened. Not because the message was romantic. Because it sounded familiar. Like something family would say. I stared at it, trying to make sense of why it bothered me. Then Rebecca came downstairs. The moment she saw me looking toward her phone, her expression changed. Not panic. Not guilt. Something else. Fear. Real fear. She grabbed the phone almost immediately. Changed the subject. And spent the rest of the evening unusually quiet. That night I barely slept. Questions kept circling through my mind. Who misses her already? Why did she react that way? What wasn't she telling me? The next morning I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I started paying attention. Not spying. Just observing. And what I discovered made less sense every day. Rebecca's travel schedule followed patterns. Very specific patterns. The same weekends every month. The same days. The same unexplained gaps. Sometimes she'd leave Friday afternoon and return Sunday night. Always with a different explanation. But the timing remained remarkably consistent. Like clockwork. Then I found something even stranger. A receipt. Hidden inside her work bag. Gas station purchase. Small town. 3 hours away. A town she'd never once mentioned visiting. The date matched one of her supposed conferences. I looked up the town online. Nothing there. No convention center. No medical conferences. Nothing. Just neighborhoods. Schools. Families. Normal life. That's when my concern transformed into something darker. Because I wasn't just finding inconsistencies anymore. I was finding evidence. Evidence that my wife was lying. The question was why. And the answer was waiting for me at the end of a road I never should have traveled. But by then, it was already too late to turn back. 3 months after my first suspicion, Rebecca announced another business trip. 3 days. Same city she'd mentioned several times before. A place called Millbrook. She packed a suitcase, kissed the kids goodbye, and left. Everything looked normal. Except this time, I followed her. Even now, I hate admitting that. I hate remembering the guilt, the shame, the feeling that I was betraying my own wife. But something inside me needed answers. So I waited 20 minutes, got into my car, and drove after her. At first she followed the highway exactly as expected, heading toward the city she claimed to be visiting. I started feeling ridiculous. Maybe I really was paranoid. Maybe this entire thing existed only in my imagination. Then she exited, not toward Millbrook, toward a completely different route. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. My heart pounded louder with every mile. Rebecca continued driving, past office buildings, past shopping centers, past anything connected to business. Eventually she entered a residential neighborhood, tree-lined streets, playgrounds, family homes, normal suburban life. Then she pulled into a driveway and parked. I watched from half a block away, confused, terrified, unable to breathe. The front door opened. 2 children ran outside. A boy and a girl. They looked around 10 and 12 years old, and then they threw themselves into Rebecca's arms. Like children greeting their mother. She hugged them, kissed their heads, carried their backpacks, the way she'd always greeted our own children. The way only a parent does. My blood turned cold. I sat frozen inside my car, unable to process what I was seeing, because there are moments in life when reality breaks. Moments when your brain refuses to accept what's directly in front of you. This was one of them. Then another person appeared. A man, mid-40s, average build, dark hair. He walked onto the porch smiling. Rebecca kissed him. Not passionately, not secretly, comfortably, naturally, like people who had done it thousands of times before. My wife kissed another man in front of children who clearly knew her. And somehow that wasn't even the worst part. Because when the children called her name, they didn't call her Rebecca. They called her Mom. And at that exact moment, my entire life shattered. But what I discovered the next day would be even more unbelievable. I don't remember driving home that night. People always describe emotional trauma as feeling like a punch to the stomach. They're wrong. The punch hurts. This felt like reality itself had been ripped away. I sat in my driveway for almost 2 hours after returning home. The engine is off. The windows fogged. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Every memory I'd ever shared with Rebecca suddenly felt contaminated. Every anniversary. Every vacation. Every promise. Every, I love you. Had any of it been real? Or had I simply been one half of a carefully constructed lie? Inside the house, my children were watching television. Laughing. Arguing over snacks. Living normal lives. They had no idea their world was hanging by a thread. And honestly, neither did I. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rebecca hugging those children. Children who clearly believed she was their mother. Children who looked genuinely happy to see her. Which raised a terrifying question. How long had this been happening? Days? Months? Years? The next morning, I called in sick to work. Then I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. I felt ridiculous saying the words aloud. I wasn't some wealthy businessman. I wasn't living inside a crime movie. I was a middle-aged husband trying to understand why his wife appeared to have another family. The investigator's name was Frank. Former police detective. 58 years old. The kind of man who spoke very little but seemed to notice everything. I showed him photographs of Rebecca. Explained what I'd seen. Expected him to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, he listened quietly. Then I asked one question. Do you want the truth? The way he said it unsettled me, because it sounded less like a question and more like a warning. Still, I nodded. 3 weeks later, Frank called. His voice sounded unusually serious. We need to meet. Those 4 words changed everything. We met in a diner outside town. Frank slid a thick manila folder across the table. I remember staring at it, terrified to open it, because part of me still hoped there was an innocent explanation. Maybe she was volunteering. Maybe she was helping relatives. Maybe I'd misunderstood everything. Then I opened the folder, and my last illusion disappeared. Photographs. Dozens of them. Rebecca is entering the same house repeatedly. Rebecca is attending school events. Rebecca is shopping for groceries. Rebecca is celebrating birthdays. Rebecca is sitting beside the same man. Rebecca is holding the same children. Year after year. The timestamp stretched back almost a decade. 10 years. 10 years. My wife had been living a second life for 10 years. I felt physically sick. Then Frank handed me another document. Property records. School registrations. Medical forms. And that's when I learned something impossible. The children weren't relatives. They weren't foster kids. They weren't neighbors. According to school records, Rebecca was listed as their mother, not stepmother. I stared at the paperwork, certain there had to be some mistake. Then Frank spoke. The bigger question isn't who those kids are. I looked up. His expression had changed. Daniel, the bigger question is who the husband is. A chill crawled up my spine, because suddenly I realized something horrifying. I knew almost nothing about the man. Nothing except that he'd kissed my wife. And somehow, that was about to become the most important detail of all. For the next several days, I became obsessed. I wish there was a more noble way to describe it. There isn't. I stopped sleeping. Stopped concentrating at work. Stopped enjoying anything. My entire existence revolved around one question. Who was this man? Frank eventually gave me a name. Michael Carter. 45 years old. Construction manager. No criminal record. No obvious red flags. Just an ordinary man. An ordinary man living what appeared to be an ordinary life. With my wife. The similarities between our lives disturbed me. Michael had 2 children. I had 2 children. Michael owned a house. I owned a house. Michael believed Rebecca was his wife. I believed the same thing. It sounded insane. Impossible. Yet every piece of evidence pointed in that direction. One evening, I parked outside Michael's neighborhood. Not because I had a plan. I just needed to see him. Needed to understand what kind of man had stolen my wife. But when I finally watched him interact with those children, something unexpected happened. I didn't see a villain. I saw a father, helping his daughter ride a bicycle, laughing with his son, carrying groceries into the house. The same things I did every day. The same exhausted smile. The same tired posture. The same ordinary love. And suddenly a terrible possibility entered my mind. What if he didn't know? What if he was being lied to too? The idea seemed ridiculous. Yet it refused to leave. Because whenever I replayed that moment in my head, the way he kissed Rebecca, the way the children greeted her, nothing felt secretive. Nothing felt hidden. It looked normal, comfortable, legitimate, as if everyone involved genuinely believed they were a family. That realization haunted me. For days. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Because Michael unknowingly handed me the final clue. And it led directly to the truth. It happened by accident. At least I think it did. Michael stopped at a coffee shop on his way home from work. I happened to be there. Watching. Waiting. Trying to gather courage I wasn't sure I possessed. For 20 minutes, I sat across the room staring at him. Wondering whether I should leave. Wondering whether confronting him would destroy whatever remained of my life. Then he stood up. And our eyes met. For a split second, something strange happened. Recognition. Not from me. From him. His expression changed. Confusion. Then concern. Then suspicion. He walked directly toward my table. My heart nearly stopped. Do I know you? I swallowed. No. He studied my face. You've been looking at me. I couldn't think of a lie. Couldn't think of anything. So I did something reckless. Something completely insane. I said the first thing that entered my mind. Are you married to Rebecca? The color drained from his face instantly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The entire coffee shop seemed to disappear. Then he slowly sat down. How do you know my wife? My wife. There it was again. The phrase that had destroyed my sanity. I looked directly into his eyes. And said words I never imagined saying. Because she's my wife too. Silence. Complete silence. Michael stared at me, waiting for a punchline. A joke. Anything. When none came, he laughed. Not because he found it funny, because it was too absurd to believe. Then he saw my expression and stopped laughing. I reached into my wallet, removed a photograph. A family picture from our last Christmas. Rebecca is standing beside me. Our children are smiling. Holiday decorations in the background. I handed it to him. The moment he saw the photograph, his hands started shaking. Then he pulled out his phone, opened his gallery, turned the screen toward me. Another family photograph. Rebecca, Michael, 2 children. Christmas decorations. Different house. Different year. Same woman. Same smile. Same lie. And in that moment, both of us realized the impossible was true. Neither of us was the other man. We were both husbands. And neither of us had any idea who we'd actually married. But the most devastating revelation was still waiting for us. Because once Michael started comparing stories, the timeline stopped making sense. And the truth hiding underneath was darker than either of us imagined. We spent 5 hours talking. 5 hours that felt like 5 minutes. And every answer created 10 new questions. Michael believed he'd married Rebecca 12 years ago. I believed I'd married her 16 years ago. Michael had wedding photographs. So did I. Michael had legal documents. So did I. Michael had tax records listing them as married. I had identical records. The more evidence we exchanged, the less reality made sense. Eventually Michael said something that made my blood run cold. Wait. He grabbed an old photo from his phone, enlarged it, then pushed it toward me. Look at the date. I looked, and felt the room spin. The photo had been taken on June 14th. 10 years earlier, Rebecca stood beside Michael at their son's birthday party. Smiling, holding a cake, being a mother. I already knew that. What shocked me was the date. Because on June 14th 10 years earlier, Rebecca had been standing beside me at my father's funeral. I remembered it perfectly. The weather, the church, the flowers, everything. Which meant one thing. One of those dates was wrong. Or someone had deliberately altered evidence. And if Rebecca was willing to fake official records, then what else had she lied about? The answer arrived 2 days later. Inside a storage unit neither of us knew existed. And what we found there changed the entire story. Because Rebecca wasn't just hiding 2 families. She was hiding her past. A past connected to a secret neither husband had ever heard. A secret powerful enough to explain everything. And terrifying enough to destroy what remained of both our lives. If someone had told me a month earlier that I would be standing beside my wife's other husband while breaking open the truth of her secret life, I would have laughed in their face. But there we were. 2 strangers connected by the same woman. 2 fathers whose lives had been built on the same lie. And now we were working together. Not because we trusted each other. Because we had no choice. The storage unit came from a clue neither of us expected. A bank statement. 1 monthly charge. $38.99. A payment Rebecca had somehow managed to hide for years. When Michael discovered it among old financial records, we traced it to a storage facility 30 miles outside the city. Neither of us knew what we would find. Photographs? Documents? Evidence of an affair? Maybe answers. Maybe more lies. The unit manager initially refused access. But after verifying information connected to Rebecca's account and reviewing certain legal documentation Michael possessed, we eventually gained entry. I still remember the sound. The metal door rattles upward. The smell of dust. The darkness inside. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Boxes. Plastic containers. Old furniture. The leftovers of an ordinary life. Then we started opening things. And everything changed. Inside the first box were photographs. Hundreds of them. Not of us. Not of our children. Not of either family. These were older. Much older. Pictures dating back nearly 25 years. Rebecca as a teenager. Rebecca is in college. Rebecca was standing beside people neither of us recognized. Parents. Relatives. Friends. Entire pieces of her life she'd never mentioned. I stared at those images, realizing something strange. The woman in the photos looked happy. Genuinely happy. Not the carefully controlled version we'd known. Not the woman constantly balancing schedules and stories. This version seemed free. Then Michael opened another box and found a stack of newspaper clippings. My stomach tightened immediately because every clipping featured the same headline. A missing person case. The articles were old. Over 20 years old. Yellowed with age. Fading at the edges. And every single article centered around one person. Rebecca. According to the reports, she had disappeared when she was 21. Vanished without explanation. Gone for almost 11 months. No contact. No clues. No answers. Eventually she reappeared. Alive. But unwilling to explain where she'd been. I read those articles 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. Trying to understand. Because Rebecca had never mentioned any of this. Not once. Not in 16 years. Not ever. It wasn't just a secret. It was an entire missing chapter of her life. And somehow, I knew the answer was buried inside it. Near the back of the storage unit sat a small locked trunk. The kind of thing people keep when they can't bear throwing away memories. It took almost an hour to open. Neither of us spoke much during that time. The tension was unbearable. Every new discovery made Rebecca feel more unfamiliar, more distant, more like a stranger. Finally the lock snapped. Inside were dozens of journals, bundles of letters, and one sealed envelope. Across the front were 6 handwritten words. For whoever learns the truth. The handwriting was Rebecca's. I recognized it instantly. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, 23 pages long. And before I finished the first paragraph, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The letter began with an apology. Not excuses. Not justifications. An apology. Rebecca wrote that she never intended for either family to discover the truth. She believed she could maintain the lie forever. She believed she could protect everyone. But she knew eventually everything would collapse. Then came the revelation. The secret she had hidden for decades. When Rebecca was 21, she disappeared because she suffered a severe psychological breakdown following a traumatic event she never fully described. During that period, she spent months moving between cities, using different names, different identities, different versions of herself. According to her own words, she struggled with memory loss, dissociation, and long periods where she couldn't clearly remember what she'd done. Doctors eventually diagnosed her with a complex trauma-related condition. Treatment helped, but not completely. And during those lost months, she met Michael. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. I kept reading. Rebecca explained that her relationship with Michael began during the period when her life was fragmented, unstable, confused. She believed she was building a future, a normal life. Then months later she disappeared again, returned to her previous city, resumed treatment, and eventually met me. At first, she genuinely believed the earlier relationship had ended. At least that's what the letter claimed. But years later, everything came back. The memories, the confusion, the unfinished life she'd left behind. And that's when she made the decision that destroyed everyone. Instead of choosing one life, she chose both. For 10 years she traveled between them, maintaining 2 identities, 2 families, 2 worlds. And somehow she made it work. Until now. I lowered the letter, unable to speak, unable to think, because the explanation somehow made everything worse. Not better, worse. Because now I understood. The lies weren't random. They weren't temporary. They were deliberate. Years of deliberate deception. And we still hadn't heard her side face to face. That confrontation was coming. And none of us were prepared for it. 3 days later, Michael and I agreed on a plan. No surprises. No violence. No shouting if possible. Just the truth. We arranged to meet Rebecca at a neutral location. A small lakeside cabin owned by a family friend. She arrived shortly after sunset. Smiling. Completely unaware. The moment she stepped inside and saw both of us sitting there, her face lost all color. I will never forget that expression. Not guilt. Not fear. Recognition. Like a prisoner finally hearing the lock open. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Rebecca quietly closed the door. And whispered one sentence. I wondered when this day would come. I wanted to scream. To demand answers. To ask how she could do this to us. But somehow Michael spoke first. His voice shaking. Which one of us is your husband? Rebecca looked at him. Then at me. And what she said next shattered both of us. You both are. Silence. Absolute silence. Then tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not manipulative tears. The kind people cry when they know there's no escape left. She sat down. And began telling the story we'd spent months chasing. Some parts matched the letter. Others were far worse. For years she'd convinced herself she wasn't hurting anyone. Both families were happy. Both sets of children were loved. Both husbands felt valued. She told herself the lie was protecting people. But deep down she knew the truth. She wasn't protecting us. She was protecting herself. Protecting herself from choosing. Protecting herself from loss. Protecting herself from consequences. Every year the deception became harder. Every year she promised herself she would end it. Every year she failed. And eventually the lie became too large to escape. Then came the question neither Michael nor I wanted to ask. But had to. The children. What about the children? Rebecca broke completely. Sobbing so hard she couldn't speak for several moments. Then she answered. And the answer stunned us. Because the biggest secret wasn't about the marriages. It was about the children. Rebecca revealed that neither family knew the complete truth about their own history. Not even her. Years earlier, during her period of disappearance and instability, important records had been lost, altered, or hidden. DNA testing later confirmed something unbelievable. Michael's daughter wasn't biologically his. She was mine. And my son Jacob wasn't biologically mine. He was Michael's. The room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. At first I thought I'd misunderstood. Then Rebecca showed us the reports. Official reports. Verified years earlier. Reports she'd hidden. The tests had been conducted after medical complications raised questions. Questions she never answered. Instead, she buried the results. Buried them because revealing them would have exposed everything. I stared at the papers. My mind was unable to process what I was seeing. My son. Not biologically mine. Yet completely mine. Michael looked equally shattered. His daughter. Not biologically his. Yet still his daughter. In that moment something unexpected happened. Neither of us became angry. Neither of us walked out. Because suddenly the biology didn't matter. Those children had been ours every day of their lives. Nothing could change that. Nothing. Yet the damage was done. The truth was finally exposed. And every life connected to Rebecca would now have to face it. The hardest part was still ahead. Telling the children. And living with what came after. The following months were the hardest period of my life. Harder than discovering the lie. Harder than meeting Michael. Harder than the confrontation. Because betrayal creates an explosion. But the aftermath creates ruins. And ruins remain long after the explosion ends. The children eventually learned the truth. Carefully. Gradually. With therapists present. There were tears. Questions. Confusion. Anger. More heartbreak than I can adequately describe. Some days they hated Rebecca. Other days they desperately wanted their mother. Both reactions were understandable. Both were painful. Michael and I remained in contact. Not because we planned to. Because our lives had become permanently connected. Over time something strange developed. Respect. Neither of us had caused this. Neither of us had chosen it. We were simply two fathers trying to protect children caught in the middle. And somehow, that shared goal mattered more than our shared betrayal. Rebecca eventually moved into an apartment alone. Not because we forced her. Because she understood the consequences. For the first time in years, there were no secrets. No schedules. No double lives. Just reality. Painful reality. But reality nonetheless. And slowly, very slowly, our families began rebuilding. Not what we had before. That was impossible. Something different. Something honest. People often ask me whether I hate Rebecca. The answer surprises them. I don't hate her. There were times I wanted to. Times I thought I should. But hate requires certainty. And this story taught me that human beings are rarely simple enough for certainty. What she did was wrong. Unforgivably wrong. She broke trust on a scale I never thought possible. She hurt people who loved her. She shattered lives. Those facts will never change. But another fact remains true as well. For 16 years, she loved our children. For 16 years, she cared for our family. Even while living inside a terrible lie. Human beings can be loving and destructive at the same time. Good and broken at the same time. That's the uncomfortable lesson I learned. The world isn't divided into heroes and villains. Sometimes it's divided into wounded people making terrible choices. If there's one lesson I want anyone listening to remember, it's this. The truth always costs less than the lie. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually every lie demands payment. And the longer you wait, the higher the price becomes. Rebecca spent 10 years avoiding one painful decision. In the end, everyone paid for it. Both families. Both husbands. All 4 children. And herself. The secret she thought was protecting everyone became the very thing that destroyed everything. As for me, I'm still healing. Still rebuilding. Still learning who I am after the collapse of the life I thought I knew. But I've learned something important. You can survive truths that seem impossible. You can survive betrayal. You can survive heartbreak. What destroys people isn't the truth. It's living in the darkness long enough to forget that truth exists. And sometimes, the end of a lie is the beginning of a life that's finally real. Even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Because reality, no matter how painful, is still better than a beautiful illusion. And that is how I discovered my wife secretly had a second family for 10 years. And how meeting her other husband changed all of our lives forever.